Wait. Welcome to First in Fiction, your first stop for learning to write fantastic fiction. I'm your host, Aaron Gansky, and with us we have Molly Jo.
Yep,
Molly Jo,
I'm
why don't you
Molly
say
Jo.
hi to the people and do a little song and dance while I try and invite Pops back to the broadcast here.
You don't want me to do a song and dance, but I will say hi. I'm the producer of the First in Fiction podcast. The technical difficulties we've been having tonight have nothing to do with us. It's all, well, dare I say it, yes, it's Google. So we are having some issues with that, but otherwise, I'm going to produce a really great show for you guys tonight.
Yeah, I do apologize. It is, I think, partially Google, partially the weather. I've got some pretty rainy weather out here, and I'm wondering if that has an effect on my internet speed. And so I've been doing some lagging occasionally, dropping out the connections, etc. So we're hoping that it runs smoothly. We will try and move quickly for you tonight with the intent of being courteous of your time, and we do thank you guys for hanging out with us and joining us. Those of you listening on the audio broadcast, you can listen to us live on Tuesday nights at 6:30 p.m. or whenever Google decides to let us actually start the broadcast. In this case, it was 6:49, but usually we're pretty good about starting around 6:30, 6:35. And Pops, it looks like you're back with us.
I think so. Can you hear me?
Hooray! So
There you go.
I can, yeah. So let's get right into it. We are going to be featuring this year an Ask the Author segment, in which case we field questions from the Facebook and Twitter sphere, etc. Questions that you might have to ask an author, and then we offer our answers back to you. And so our first question comes from Steve McLean, former co-host of the show, good friend of mine, and his question is, I thought, somewhat simple, but also can be, varying layers of complexity. And his question was, why do you write? So for me, I write because I love to and because I have to. Pops, I think I get this from you, and when you talk about your answer, we'll notice a lot of similarities there. But for me, if I'm not writing, I'm thinking about writing. And I find that I can be a lot more productive if I actually put words on page, because that allows me to focus on other things throughout the day, like little things like family or eating, hygiene, normal stuff that other people tend to focus on that I sometimes forget if I'm lost in my own daydreaming world. So for me, it's because I love to. It's because it's the only way I'll ever find out how my stories end, and it's just kind of a passion that I have. When I don't write, I maybe not depressed, but I get very irritable when I don't write. Naomi will send me back to my room. She'll say, "You haven't written anything in a while, so go take 15 minutes and write a page and come back out." So normally I do, and I'm ready to face the world again. So good for her with that. Pops, how about you? Why do you write?
To make money, to get rich, become famous. All right, none of those are true. I write because I want to. I enjoy it. I find it the most fulfilling thing I do, no matter how hard it is. And trust me, there are days when it's just tough. It's like having teeth pulled, but you stay with it. And because I think it has some value. It has value to me personally. Whether it's the book becomes a bestseller or not, there's just something that in the writing that changes me. But I also think that writing changes the world. And I believe that of fiction, too, even though I write a lot of nonfiction, but I've done a lot of novels, and I'm aware historically how many times novels have changed the world. Abraham Lincoln thought Uncle Tom's Cabin started the Civil War, so it can make a big difference that way. So it is a bit of an addiction, too, and so the other thing I would say is it's one of the greatest and most varied things you can do, because no two books are the same, no two storylines are the same. You can switch between first person and third person in books, and there's just an infinite amount of variety. Plus, you get to control the lives of all your characters.
So that's really nice for those of you who are control freaks. You want to control everything. Fiction's your way to do that. So, Molly,
I
how
still
about
have characters who won't talk to me. So,
yeah. How about you, Molly?
My favorite quote is from Isaac Asimov sums it up. He said, I write for the same reason I breathe, because if I didn't, I would die. And that's pretty much it. I write because I can't not write. I have so much in me, so many stories to tell. Everywhere I go, I'm seeing the stories and how it could play out with different characters. How would I write this scene? Or if this were me, how would I write that dialogue? And it's just a part of me that I've always had, and I've never been able to turn it off. So it keeps me healthy to be able to write and put things out. And I had a friend of mine actually point out about 10, 15 years ago that I am healthiest when I'm writing, because it's that outlet that I have. So I keep the world alive by putting words on paper.
You keep the world alive.
I would
Because
probably possibly kill some people otherwise, So
I would burn things if I didn't write. So
I would hurt people, and I'm a pacifist, so I'd rather put it on paper.
Well, yeah, I think writers write for the same reason that artists paint, for the same reason that engineers design and build. It's just something that is within you that has to be done. It's compulsion. It can become an addiction. It becomes a part of who we are, and it's very satisfying. Sometimes frustrating, but very satisfying as well. So that, Mr. McLean, is why we write. Thank you for your question. And next week we'll have a brand new question and some new answers there. But today, as is our new topic, we're doing the new year a little bit differently, kind of section by section. We're going to be spending multiple weeks on the same topic to really delve into it deeply. And so our first topic of the month, or overarching theme, is going to be ideas. What do you do with ideas? And of course, the first thing that you want to do with an idea is brainstorm. You can brainstorm to come up with ideas. You can also brainstorm to find out where your ideas are going to lead. So Pops, I'm going to toss it over to you and let you talk a little bit about what we mean when we say brainstorming, so we're all on the same page here.
Yeah, brainstorming has several definitions. In our context, we're talking about the creative process of coming up with a usable, sellable idea that a publisher might want. If you're just writing for yourself, and there's nothing wrong with that, you don't have to worry about whether or not it's saleable. But for most of us, we want it to be published, and so brainstorming is that process where we look at all the different possibilities and then try to develop some idea that, first of all, captures our thinking, captures our mind, and then we try to put it together in some kind of fashion that will catch other people's minds. So a couple things to understand right from the get-go is most writers have more ideas than they'll be able to use. And I encourage writers to do that. Don't dwell on just one idea. Keep coming up with ideas, even though they may never see the light of day. That has worked for me. I used to keep an average of 27 ideas on a spreadsheet. And I knew most of them would never be written, but that didn't matter. They did something for me and often led to the other thing I was writing. And again, with brainstorming, you may have to choose between the one that interests you the most and the one that you might be able to sell. So that'll be one of the first things you have to figure out is if you're writing for yourself or if you're writing for publication. The two can be the same, but sometimes we have to. I have ideas I'd love to write. I just don't think anybody would want to read them, and that's okay. I work on them anyway. I do it for myself sometimes. So again, have more ideas than you can handle. That just keeps the juices flowing. Write them down. You don't have to write pages and pages on them. Sometimes it's just a single sentence. My book, you can see the book cover back there. A Ship Possessed came out from a proposal, and I had just one line on it, and the publisher bid on it. I was proposing something else, and it's just because I kept a whole bunch of ideas together, and that was one that popped into my mind, and that ended up becoming the first of 3 books with that character, and a whole bunch of other books for that publisher.
Yeah, that was the J.D. Stanton Mysteries. Very well done books. The characters, I think one of your better characters. Really enjoyed the J.D. Stanton Mysteries, and I think you make a really good point. Have more ideas than you know what to do with. Some great ideas actually come from combining the multiple ideas that you'll have, and so Well, one idea may not work on its own, and another idea that you have may not work on its own. Combining those two in some way might prove to be very effective and make for a very compelling novel. And so that is another power to having to being able to brainstorm. You also mentioned a little bit about the difference between a sellable or a saleable manuscript and one that you're writing more for yourself. And one of the things that I say is I always encourage writers to write what they love first, and then worry about the market secondly. And obviously, if you want to make money and you want to make a living and you want to feed your family, you do need to think about the bigger markets where people are going to see your books, buy your books, be enthralled by your books, and buy the next book as well. But if you're really passionate about a particular story and you don't care if millions of eyeballs see it, you can find a place to publish it with several smaller magazines or publications, small houses, college presses, university presses, those types of things. I always think that there's a market for every story. It just may not be a big market. Would you agree with that, Pops? Is that kind of how you look at it, whether looking for a bigger market or looking for a smaller market?
Sure, and a lot of us are programmed to think that what we need to do is write the next national bestseller, and that's nice. But most people who have that kind of success don't see it coming. It might be what they want, but they don't see it coming. I'm thinking of Jerry Jenkins in the Left Behind series that he did with Dr. Tim LaHaye, and he was brought in as the co-writer, and for him it was just another writing project. He'd done 100 books, and so for him it was another writing project for him to do, and as it turned out, it became a huge international bestseller, still a bestseller. Knocked me off the bestseller list my first and only month on it, because they just turned in one book after another, and people for some reason loved it. And he will tell you today he was the most surprised man on the planet. No one thought it was going to be that great, and it was rejected several times. I was on a program one time with somebody, and he introduced himself. He was an acquisitions editor, and he said, "Yeah, I'm the guy who rejected Jerry Jenkins in the Left Behind stories," and that was his claim to fame.
Ouch.
That he passed on that. So that really isn't unusual. So you have to find out what you want to do. If you want to write for publication, you have to first have a real love for it, but also keep the reader in mind. And then you don't know what's going to become a bestseller and what's not, or when.
That's true. Yeah, you could say the same thing about the Harry Potter series, and there's a whole line of people who passed on that. For, I think, every bestseller, there's probably 2 or 3 publishers who passed on it, so that's not uncommon.
Or 20 or 30 publishers.
Yeah, exactly.
I think Grisham was rejected. Grisham was rejected, 25, 30 times?
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me. Yeah. I've only been rejected like 22 times, so I'm obviously more successful than Grisham.
Amateur.
Amateur. Let's spin it that way. That's how you know when you're a real writer, when you start collecting rejection slips. You got a ton of them. It means you're serious about writing. Well, let's get back into this idea of brainstorming. I think one of the first things that you're going to want to do is determine, are you writing a short story or are you writing a novel? And I think Maya Good mentioned that she's going to embark on a Ray Bradbury challenge where she's going to be writing a short fiction story with, I think every week is what she said.
Mm-hmm.
Her and some of her co-hosts, Gerald Hornsby from Literary Roadhouse, which is a great podcast if you get a chance to listen to that. Very insightful. How do you know the difference between something that's going to be a novel and a short story? I think a lot of it comes back to this brainstorming process. And you do a ton of brainstorming, you'll be able to see how far out your story goes. And you'll be able to see if your story is simply about a boy going fishing one afternoon, or if your story is about a man fishing over the course of several days trying to bring in a marlin. That's a longer story. And so by going through this process of brainstorming, the depth that you can get into, I think, is going to determine the length of your story. And also, if you want it to be a novel, you're going to have to stick at it longer. With this brainstorming process, you're going to have to put in more time. You're going to have to roll up your sleeves and really be invested in thinking the project through so that you will have enough information to actually begin your work and see it through all that difficult part, which is to say the middle. So there are a few different ways to Brainstorm. And Pops, I'm going to let you talk a little bit about your process here.
Well, I think the first thing to think about is that writers are creative people, and we need to turn on that creative switch and give ourselves permission to have wild, outlandish ideas. Just because we have an idea doesn't mean that we're going to have to follow it all the way through. But we need to give ourselves that kind of permission. I call it free-form thinking, and it's a process by which the writer allows himself or herself the permission to imagine anything and everything. I liken it to going window shopping, where you walk by the windows and you see something that you like. Well, you might come up with 15 different ideas, and it's idea 14 that rings your bell, and the one that really catches your imagination.
Can I pop in here real quick, Pops? I just want to say, if it's idea 14 out of 15, that means you're doing a good job. Like, it's going to take. That's where a lot of those really good ideas come from, are down there toward the 14 and the 15. And another quick rule that I mentioned later on that I want to insert here, because I feel like it's kind of the same thing, is never tell yourself no. The idea may seem outlandish and crazy, but you don't tell yourself no. Brainstorming is not the time for that. We can edit later and tell ourselves no plenty when we get to the revision process. Right now, we're collecting ideas, so no matter how ridiculous it sounds, put it down and remember it. So I didn't mean to interrupt, Pops.
No, that's fine. That's fine. And what I found with most successful writers, that is those who are producing on a regular basis, that's what I mean by success, is that they're always tuned into ideas. They're always looking for ideas. And I still recall very, very clearly once when I was living down in the high desert, down where you live, and there's an old saying, when I first moved there, somebody told me, says there's 2 days a year when the wind doesn't blow, and this isn't one of them. And you could say that almost any day the wind's going to blow, and the wind was really blowing quite well, and I was stopped at a stoplight when a piece of paper hit the window on the driver's side on a car, and I looked over and I saw this piece of paper, and then the wind blew it away, and my first thought was, what if I had seen my son's picture on that piece of paper? And would I go chasing after it? What would I do? And then people behind me started honking their horns. Apparently the light had turned green. No one told me. But that was my first thought. It was, this is a story. This is a story. Is it a story for me? Well, I didn't know at that time, and I've never written it. But it was a story. And so it had possibilities, and it stayed with me a long time before I moved on to other things. So always be ready to see an idea. That's the difference between non-creatives and creatives. Creatives see the idea any place, every place. Some of my best ideas have come while watching movies, and the ideas had nothing to do with the movie.
Yeah. And that kind of leads us to the second point, which is to write something down. So when this happens, you mentioned that you kept a spreadsheet of an average of 27, I think you said 27 ideas at one time. Write these down. Write these down. You mentioned something about Dean Koontz and Todd Thomas here, Pops?
Yeah, Dean Koontz tells a story that while he was working on one of his books, he's a very disciplined writer, a phrase came to him that was clearly not his book that he was working on, and it was, my name is Odd Thomas and I see dead people, no, not like the movie. And he stopped, he wrote that down on a yellow legal pad, and then he wrote, I think, maybe 2 pages. He just started brainstorming, wrote down a couple of pages, then set it aside and went back to work. And that became the Odd Thomas series. He doesn't normally write in series, but he's done a number of those. And it was because, as a professional writer, professional creative, he knew that his subconscious was telling him something. He needed to pay attention. He took enough time to jot down a few things, and it became a very successful interruption to his work when he got around to writing those. So, yeah, write something down. Just scribble a line or two. I'm not talking about writing 20 pages. Write a paragraph. Just describe it in a few lines if need be, but just jot it down. And sometimes what that does is it throws open the floodgates. And once you start that, you can't stop. And you start making note after note after note. It all just rushes out in a torrent. Not every time, but sometimes.
You know, I will mention, is everybody still here? Hang on.
I'm here. Yep.
Yeah.
my computer just randomly minimized the screen and had me panicking. I thought maybe it was trying to go to sleep on me.
It was
My
me.
apologies, guys.
It was,
I'm on. Oh, you were going to
Stop
sleep.
it!
it was me. That's my supernatural powers. I can put computers to sleep just by talking and anything else.
Yeah,
That's
Pops.
kind of scary there, but okay.
I'm not sure if you know, Pops, but street lights, traffic lights, actually have an indicator to let you know when it's safe to go. So
Okay.
yeah, they make a light. So I've had that same problem though. But when you explore an idea, you want to think about what comes to mind first. And this is where I've heard a lot of other writers talk about this, and I sometimes disagree with them. But they'll say that comes first, or is it a character that comes first? Is it a particular event that's fascinating to you? Is it a what if? Some stories are going to be more plot driven. Some are going to be more character driven. I think what the problem that I had when I was listening to another podcast about with an idea of a plot and then find a character to fit it. And I tend to think of it the other way. Think of an interesting character and then find what story that character has to tell. It doesn't mean I just tend to gravitate a little bit more toward the character-driven side of fiction than necessarily the plot-driven side of fiction. And either way is fine. Just be aware that no book works without plot. They have to be together. So what you need to do is find a way for them to mix. And I would say that you don't necessarily need your character to be a perfect. Writing a space thriller, the temptation is going to be to have some sort of military pilot captain who's on the spaceship doing all these wonderful things. What's interesting about the Martian that's trapped on Mars a way out to survive? A botanist is not necessarily an astrophysicist, and so he's at a little bit of a disadvantage here. One of the more intriguing storylines of the Challenger, as tragic as it was, is that there was I believe an elementary school teacher on board. More fascinating because she's not an astronaut, and yet she was planning on going out to space, and what an incredible experience that would be for her and her family, and for her to be able to share with her students. Those are the types of things that match the storyline that are sometimes a little bit smaller than the story might suggest. Those are sometimes the heroes that we most often gravitate toward. So don't write those types of characters out, and don't be afraid if they don't seem to mesh perfectly. Really explore the idea and find out which character is going to match your story for the story that you want to tell.
Right, and sometimes I think new writers especially get bogged down trying to figure out whether or not they're doing it right. Should I start with the plot first? Should I have this core idea? Should I start with the character first? This is creativity. You start with whatever comes to mind because you're brainstorming. You don't really care at this point, and no one's going to see your brainstorming. You just want to let your brain run so that it gets onto the right track. So I've done books where the concept, the weird concept, has caught my attention, but I didn't have any characters for it yet. We'll go back to Ship Possessed that I mentioned earlier. The tagline for that was the USS Triggerfish returned home 50 years late in the wrong ocean without its crew, but it did not come back alone. And that's all I had. I didn't have any crew. I didn't have a protagonist. I didn't have an antagonist. All I had was that concept that a World War II submarine would come back in the wrong ocean 50 years late without its crew, but did not come back alone. And I was asked what that meant, and I said I had no idea. But through the process of percolation, the story began to form, and then a character, you mentioned him, J.D. Stanton, comes up. His name was initially J.D. Reed. Publisher changed that because there's another book that just came out with a character by a similar name, and I lost out. So, but J.D. Stanton came to mind, and then with that, other characters. And so, in that case, concept came before character. Other times, the character shows up, and I don't know what the person's facing. It's just that the character shows up. And Now that my book, last book, of Wounds, is about a seminary professor who hides out from the world. He doesn't like people. He doesn't like anything. It's because of an event in his life. And I had no idea what had scarred him. I just know the character, named after Edgar Allan Poe, Ellis Poe. And but he showed up on my doorstep, and now I had to figure out what his problem was.
And I like with the J.D. Stanton mysteries that you have him. He's a retired Navy captain, isn't it?
Yeah.
And so you kind of resist the urge of having an enlisted active enlisted active military personnel. But the fact that he was retired, and one of the scenes I remember starting off with is him being recently retired and being called out of retirement. That became kind of the joke throughout the series. He always gets called back in, but the fact that he's a little bit older, a little bit more seasoned, helps him to kind of pair up with some of these other kind of younger military folk, and you had a really good dynamic with the characters there. So I liked what you did with that. One of the other things that you can do, other than just living with the idea for a while, is writing a few pages. Trying to find the voice of the character, find out what it is the character wants to say, how they want to tell the story. Is this going to be first person? Is it going to be third person? How do they view the world? And ask yourself if it feels right. Try it in a different point of view. Try it with a different protagonist in mind, and see what happens. These are not necessarily pages that you're going to keep, but they're warming up. A lot of times, you don't know what song you're going to sing until the notes are coming out of your mouth, and so it's a way of kind of proverbially clearing your throat and going through some of the motions to find out what the story wants to become. And this is going to sound very strange, but those of you who are writers will understand. Don't neglect your story. Let it help you along the way. Sometimes a story wants to be told, and it's going to fill in a lot of the blanks for you. Run with that. Run with that. And then when it stops talking, make it answer some questions. Put it in the corner and tell it no food or drink until you answer my questions. Shine a bright light on it and ask it where it was on the night of the 15th. Do whatever you need to do to get the answers that you're seeking. Writing a few pages is another good strategy.
You bring up a good point. A story will develop itself over time. And that's what we as writers have to do, is we have to learn to trust our writerly instincts. We have to learn to trust our subconscious. Even though we don't see the whole picture, we can see the big picture, and then if given enough time, the story will unfold before us, and it will let us know what's going on, which sometimes means you have to change. Going back to this A Ship Possessed book, the sidekick, the supporting protagonist in the book was a young ensign, and my character is called back to duty from retired, and he has a rank of captain, which is very high in the Navy. It's not so high in Army and Air Force, but in the Navy it's the rank you achieve before you become an admiral. And I just couldn't get the dynamics between the two to work. I just couldn't get it to work out. And finally it hit me, is my young ensign wasn't a male, he was a woman. And that was the problem.
He was a secret she.
No, it wasn't a secret. It was a secret to me. And
that's what I mean.
That's the problem. So I joke about giving him a sex change operation, sexual reassignment surgery, in the book, and he became a she, and all of a sudden it brought out new aspects in my protagonist. It changed the plot. It just, all of a sudden it worked. But I didn't have that when I started. I was wrong when I started.
Yeah. Don't be afraid to, you hate that when you're like 50 pages, 100 pages, 150 pages in. You don't like having to make that change, but when it's necessary, you've got to do it. That's one reason why writing a few pages is beneficial, so that you can kind of spot that and identify that and say, these characters are not working together the way they should be. What can I do to make that work? What do the characters want to be done so that it will work? Another strategy is to practice a pitch, the elevator cell, right? That you imagine you're sitting down with an agent, pitch them the idea. What is it that you pitch? How do you say it? one of the ways you can do this is by trying to condense the story that you're telling into one sentence, maybe two, and that's quite the challenge. But it forces you to really kind of think about your story. I will say that a lot of these strategies are kind of mentioned in the snowflake method for writing a novel. And if you're familiar with that, or if you're not familiar with that, you can kind of look into it. But it actually has you go through several of these steps that we've just mentioned as a process of brainstorming and outlining. It's kind of a hybrid little form, and that's, I believe, mine. I think you can buy some materials if you want to, but for the most part, you can get the method.
That's Dr. Randy Ingermunson. His doctorate isn't in creative stuff. He's got a PhD in quantum mechanics. Yeah, really bright guy, but yeah, he did the snowflake method, and for the longest time I know he was doing newsletters and he had a product. But Randy Ingermunson is his name. Just look up snowflake method. It'd be a lot easier to find than trying to figure out how to spell Ingermunson.
Yeah, snowflake. I can spell snowflake. I can't spell a lot of things, but I can spell snowflake. So.
Well, we almost named
yeah,
him snowflake.
That's a good one, and he'll have you write. That probably would have drastically altered the course of my life. So, but yeah, that's a good method to look into. Pops, you also have one other idea here called the persistent idea. What do you mean by that?
I mean, it's sometimes an idea will haunt you. It gets in your shadow and it won't let you go. And that's been one of the things I've used to weigh my ideas. Is if it doesn't let me go, then there's a good chance it won't let the reader go. If I can dismiss it, so it's when you're writing down just a few paragraphs and you go, I really don't like this, then you've done a good thing. But if you can't shake the idea, if you go to bed at night and it's there, and you wake up in the morning and it's there, and you find yourself looking out the window doing a writer's work, and this idea keeps coming back to you, then you really need to pay it some attention because there's something going on there. Doesn't mean you understand it all. You don't know how it all is going to work. That's not the point of brainstorming. That comes from writing. That's craft. That's other stuff that we'll be talking about throughout the year. But in brainstorming, you just want to find the idea that you want to work on right now. And I have found that if it haunts the corridors of my mind, I need to pay attention.
Absolutely. Yeah, as a matter of fact, this idea of brainstorming, I often call it brain barfing. And the idea is all of the ideas that you have come out on paper. And it's sometimes very, very messy. But that's what the organizational step is for later. That's what organizing an outline is about. But for me, I enjoy the brainstorming. There are a couple different strategies. We've mentioned several of them here, but some more kind of tried and true methods, the traditional brainstorming that you'll think of in like schooling that I teach my students. One of them is bubble mapping, and this is simply where on the center of the page you put the central idea. Maybe it's the paper hitting the window with your son's picture or with your name on it, something of that initial image that really grabs you, or that initial idea that really grabs you. That'll go in the center of the page, and then what you'll do is you'll draw other bubbles coming off of that. Here's the page. It's not just the name, but it's also this. It's not just that, but it's also this. There's an image of this. It's this kind of paper. So you think of everything that you possibly can about this paper, and then over here you think about the wind and where the wind is coming from and what the weather has been like, and the car that you're driving and why you were at that particular light at that particular time. Kind of break your idea down into sub-components and flesh those out a little bit more. And a slight variation of this is where you will use association. So if you don't have a plot idea such as, boy gets girl, boy loses girl, boy gets girl back, maybe it's just you want to write a story about justice. Well, justice is going to, and then you're going to have things branching off of that, the different ways that you can envision justice, whether that's a courtroom or whether that's distributing food through rations in a war-torn country, whether it's the image of Justice being blind and the blindfold and the scales, whatever it is, just everything about that that you can think of, and then you start brainstorming more on that. And what you'll find is as your page gets larger and larger and larger and full of ideas, you can start to mix and match them, and that's where some of those really powerful ideas will come from. I've finished watching the Daredevil. I'll give a content warning on it because it's very violent. But one of the things that I really love about it is that Daredevil is a lawyer and he's blind, and so you get that image of Justice wearing the blindfold and the scales, and it becomes symbolic and meaningful in that regard. And that's of in a typical superhero kind of a comic book, but it comes from this idea of justice is what drives Daredevil. That's what he's about, penance, and making people pay for their crimes, whether that be through the courtroom or whether that be at night dressed up like a weirdo beating up bad guys. So that's bubble mapping. You can also just do traditional bullet lists where you go through and you list everything that comes to mind. This is a little more linear, but it doesn't have to be in order. The order can come later. But just listing everything in bullets, if that's better for you, if you don't like drawing all the bubbles. We talked about writing short synopsis. One of the things that we didn't talk about that I'll mention here that I think is really powerful is collaborative brainstorming. And writers are very, very much by their nature individuals, and a lot of works in progress. But I find it can be very valuable to have one, maybe two trusted friends that you can converse with about your current work in progress. We talked a little bit about beta readers. These would be more alpha type readers. For me, it's Steve McLean. We hang out, we talk writing whenever we can, which is less and less often these days, sadly. But he's responsible for a lot of the ideas that come to play in the Hand of Adonai series. And he really helped me kind of shape that world and the structure that story is taking. And it came because I was stuck, and so I would start to brainstorm, and I'd say, I'm stuck, I don't know what I'm doing, and then we would start bouncing ideas off each other. So collaborative brainstorming is another powerful method for coming up with your ideas.
You know, and
now,
one of the things
the question becomes,
one of the things to remember in all of this is the more you do it, the easier it gets. That's not to say it's ever easy. It just gets easier. You get more talent at it. Frank Lloyd Wright, the great architect, used to talk about being able to shake a set of plans out of his sleeve, a design. He had done close to 800 buildings, and so when somebody comes to him and says, "I want a mansion. I want 12 bedrooms in it, and I want it overlooking this river," that he could shake the thing out of his sleeve, the basic idea, in just a couple hours, which he had to do a couple times. Same thing with writers. The more you do this, the more attuned you become to the process.
Absolutely. So then the question becomes, what all do you need to brainstorm? What, the complete brainstorm, what are you thinking of? Well, you need to think of, your story. You need to think of your characters of that nature. Specifically with characters, you want to think of your protagonist and your supporting protagonists. You want to think of your antagonist, if there is one, and your supporting antagonist. There's not always a physical antagonist. Think of the movie The Perfect Storm as the antagonist. But if you've got a person who is working against your protagonist, you need to develop them. What is it? I say, what is their motivation? You need to know what their motivation is and unique. Why do I want to read about this protagonist for 300 pages, 350 pages? Is this protagonist interesting enough to read about? Is this antagonist a force to make me feel threatened? Is he motivated properly as well? Is he not just evil for evil's sake, but he's got a plan in mind that he wants to achieve, and it's not always world domination? So you want to think interactions, the relationship they have with each other. Specifically, auxiliary characters and facilitator characters. These are ones who are on the scene in order to keep things moving, to keep the action going. They may not have a major role in the story, but they do have some important role. It might be small, but it is important to keep things moving. You'll also want to figure out if your character is going to have an arc. Are they going to grow in some way? Are they going to learn something through the course of the novel? And commercial fiction is important. People like to see your characters grow and learn new things. But you'll definitely want to know that you don't technically have to have the arc, especially like in literature. But most people are looking for some sort of arc, some sort of perhaps epiphany where the character learns something either about themselves or about the world, whatever the case may be. So as much as you can with the characters, you want to think about who they are, where they came from, what they're after, what links they'll go through to achieve their ends, and those types of things. So the more you know about them, the better off you're going to be. Pops, we also need to talk about setting. Did you have anything on setting?
Well, not a great deal, because some of that will come with the writing. If you're an outliner, a lot of it will come in the outlining. If you're an intuitive writer, it'll come to you as you get to that point. But the thing about setting is to remember that action takes place at a scene, so you need to have a lot of mini scenes, but there's going to be probably a major scene. And in the brainstorming, where do you want it to take place? So I've done a lot of them in San Diego. I've set things in overseas, Antarctica. You have to ask, where is the majority of this action going to take place? Where's the heart of it? And so you need to answer the where, and then the when. What is this the 1800s? Is this 2100? Are we in the future? And then you need to really ask yourself the question, why? Why do I want to set it here? What does the scene bring? Scene is the primary scene. The setting, I should say, the setting is a character. So it takes as much thought, I think, as your protagonist.
Absolutely, I would agree with that. The where, the when, the why, what circumstances are there, and you also want to think about, perhaps a little bit later, how the role the setting is going to play in your novel, and how that's going to interact with your characters. Like you said, Pop's setting is very much a character interact with your characters. How people are very much products of their environments. So how has the setting impacted the characters, and how do the characters impact the setting? So it's kind of a two-way street there. Actually, Pops, I'm going to toss this one over to you, but you've got some notes here on the plot. So in all of the novels you've written, what do you think about when you're brainstorming your plot? What questions do you ask yourself?
Well, I usually, I can say almost always, write in a 3-act form. So even when I'm not outlining, I know that 25% of the way in, thereabouts, I don't care if it's 22 or 30% in, but someplace around 25% there'll be the first plot point. Plot point being defined as something that happens, and my protagonist has walked through this door, and the door slams behind him. There's no returning. And that will happen 25% in and 75% in when we move into Act 3. And I'm also aware that stories bog down in the middle, so I always have something going on about 50% of the way through. So you begin with, where are you starting in this thing? Do you need a prologue to this, and then an epilogue afterwards, or do you, to set things up, you ask where it's going to start? So it's some of my Perry Sachs ones, we start in Seattle, but we don't end up in Seattle. We're usually gone very quickly to wherever the major action is going to be. So that's really the question. Where are you starting? Where are you going to be ending in your plot? Now, you don't always know the end of it at the time. Even the outliners may not know how things end, but they'll have an idea. And it's going to be a sad ending. It's going to be a hopeful ending. It's going to be a happy ending. Or the world comes to an end, whatever it might be, but you'll have a basic idea. The aliens win. The aliens lose, whatever it is you're writing. Then the real question is, how do you get there? And again, I go back to this 3-act structure. I recommend that as long as you don't become too confined. Remember, it's a guideline. It's a way of getting from one place to the other. I've done books in 2 acts. I've done them in 4 acts. 3 works the best, I think, in most cases for most stories. But I just want to keep those in mind because it keeps things moving and it keeps you away from the sags and the lags that drag your plot down. Or as I had to tell one story, said your plot, it starts off slow, then it bogs down from there.
Oh.
And because they had no concept of pacing, they had no idea where they were going. They were just writing, and they weren't really creating. And I think they went on to do some good stuff. But at that point, they just needed to know that you gotta think about the pacing. In brainstorming, not so much. You just need to know that you're going to have a brisk pace. And does your story allow for that?
And that pace is also determined by the pace is also determined by how many pages you're going to have. And I do want to reiterate the point that you made, Pops. You don't necessarily have to have, say, final answers for each of these questions, but you need to have solid answers, a good idea, at least a workable model for you to actually begin. As a discovery writer, I learn a lot about my setting and my characters and my plot as I go along. But that's not to say that I don't brainstorm. A lot of my writing is brainstorming, and I pay for it on the back end because I have to go back and do a lot of revision. Brainstorming is something that's going to happen. You can't get away. So you can do it all at the beginning, or you can do it as you go. But it still needs to be done no matter what. And you need to have some. It's like, what is it? I can't remember who said it. It's like driving at night with your headlights on. You can't see the entire way there, but you can see far enough to get you there,
Right.
One little bit at a time. So, sometimes for me, discovery writing, my brainstorming is just headlights. I'm headlight brainstorming just far enough, a chapter ahead, 2 chapters ahead, until I know I'm somewhere around Act 3, and then I think I've got to wrap this up. How am I going to wrap it up? But so I kind of brainstorm as I go. I know a lot of other people brainstorm on the front end. Things with characters, just real quick, the number of characters that you have, again, determined by the length of your book. If you're doing short fiction, you're going to want to really limit the number of characters. You have to understand, for every additional character that you add, every primary protagonist or antagonist, you're adding a lot of additional pages, because you're going to have to develop them and show the scenes where their character is developed, and where they each are going to have a character arc, etc. So having a lot of protagonists, point of view characters, is really going to expand the scope of your book. So kind of keep that in mind. That's another advantage to brainstorming, is you could get a pretty solid idea of about how long this book is going to be. So a lot of advantages there for brainstorming. That's pretty much all the notes that we have. And Molly Jo, I know that we had the issue with Google. We had to jump to a new place. Did we get many people jumping with us? Do we have some comments and questions from the room?
I'm looking back. I was able to keep the old one open, so there's a couple of people that were trying to check in, and due to their own timing, they weren't unable to. That was Patty and Becky from our Writers Club that we go to. Maya showed up. She said thanks for the shout out on that you were talking about when she's the one doing the Ray Bradbury challenge. So she and Tess found us at the new one, and a little back and forth. Tess really likes the idea. She said she has a list on her computer with about 24 ideas that she keeps rotating through, so whenever she finishes one or is stuck, she moves on. I know Mary Ruth Hughes texted me. She said she couldn't chat in the chat room for some reason. It was either Google or her computer, but she did listen to the podcast, and very often she was sending me a thumbs up when you guys hit on points that meant a lot to her, so that was nice. And one of the great things that I want to try and find this comment from Tess, she said in one novel she wanted to tell the readers how to pronounce a difficult name. She is also the local chairperson or facilitator for NaNoWriMo, so she was at an event and asked how she would do that, and several ideas came back, and one of them was have a different character mispronounce it so the main character can correct them. And I just thought that was noteworthy. That's a really slick way of getting, people to say the name. I personally, I guess I relate to that because people get my name wrong all the time. So.
Is that true, Judy?
Really?
Don't. just don't. And on a side note, I know I was not very active with the podcast, with the conversation, but it was because I forgot I was supposed to be producing. I was just listening to you guys. I don't brainstorm a lot, and so I was listening to all the information. So thanks. It was good.
Oh, I'm glad you enjoyed it. So that is, I guess, our show. We did move fairly quickly through the material. I will be posting these notes as early as tomorrow afternoon. So keep your podcast apps handy for that. And next week, we're going to be doing selecting and refining your ideas. So once we've brainstormed lots of different ideas now, how do we select the best ones and refine them into something workable? So that's what we're looking at next week. Don't forget to ask the author. You can contact me through Facebook or Twitter in order to do that, or at my website. So, Pop, how can people get in touch with you?
Well, I'm on most of the social media, so that's a good way to do that, or altongansky.com. I did, because we were so caught up trying to get the technology to work for us, failed to mention that another one of my publishers has put some ebooks on sale of mine. These are the ones I did with Mark Hitchcock. And so they're on for 99 cents. One's called Mayan Apocalypse. Mark writes nonfiction, and so the novel was based on some of his nonfiction about the Mayan calendar, the 2012, so we're kind of past that, but nonetheless it turned out to be a good story. And Digital Winter is the other one, Digital Winter. Mark Hitchcock, and I was the writer for those. And those are on throughout this month for 99 cents each.
Nice. We'll be sure to spread the word.
Absolutely. We'll get a social media ninja. Molly Joe, how can people get in touch with you?
That was really smooth the way you did that. My blog is franklymydearmojo.com. I'm on Twitter at realmojo68. I'm also all over Facebook, or you can just Google my name. And my name is spelled Molly, middle name J-O, last name R-E-A-L-Y. It is pronounced really. It is not O'Reilly. It is not Mary. I am not related to Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde in any manner whatsoever.
Mary O'Reilly.
So it's just Molly Joe Really, and you can find me.
Can we call you Joe Really?
No.
That sounds like a Star Wars name. No? All right.
Well, if it's Star Wars, yeah.
So, Star Wars, so good. That's what we need to do, is the writing of episode 7.
Okay.
Spoilerific episode. I don't know if we can work that in, but I'm
wait
sure we'd
a few
get
months.
quite a few additional listeners if we did.
We should tear apart Star Wars like once a month. That would really boost the viewership.
There you go. Here's my thought process. If you haven't seen Star Wars Episode 7 yet, there's something wrong with you. You're just not American, or something. There might be some sort of medical condition. See a doctor, and then see the listeners. So. That's what I do. That's why I'm here. So if you want to send me hate mail, you can do that at aarongansky.com, or you can find me on the Twitter at @adgansky, or on Facebook, Aaron Gansky on there. And so we get into a